Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In today's episode, I am joined by Waldemar Franco. Waldemar is an adventurer, an architect, father of three, and really built his life around movement and exploration. But after 2 knee surgeries and years of physical strain, it left him a bit disconnected from his body. However, now at 56, he guides other men through recovery, restoring mobility, balance, and the freedom to move with confidence again. So welcome, Waldemar.
Thank you, Philip. It's a joy to be here.
So, Waldemar, tell me about your early life. What was life like growing up?
I'm Mexican. I was born and raised in Mexico City. My parents got divorced when I was really young. My dad has always been active. I wouldn't say an adventurer, but he's a very disciplined engineer and very close to the sea. He's always been, close to the sea. He's a captain. He took me to his travels when I was really young. I played sports, normal sports when I was younger, and eventually I was involved in camp, the summer camps that always were very appealing to kids. I wanted to be out in nature, and that's what really called me. So I had a happy childhood. I'm the older of three. I have 2 younger sisters. Eventually, when I was a little older, I went to live in a small town near Valle de Bravo, near Mexico City, which is called Valle de Bravo, which is in the forest. And that's when I got involved in mountain biking and all these very active activities. I've always been really active since I was a kid, and I played a lot of sports. And eventually, when I was really young, I started free diving. That was my big thing when I was 8 or 10 years old. So in a Caribbean island in Mexico, and I really got involved into how the body moves in nature. For some reason, when I was really young, I was always dreaming about, I don't know if you remember this image of the guy who used to sponsor the Camel cigarettes way back then. He was this explorer who was always in the Amazon River, really handsome with his cigarette. And I said, I want to be that guy, not because of the cigarettes, but I just want to be out there. So I was always dreaming about adventure. Eventually, when I was in my, late teens or early 20s, I got into climbing and eventually mountaineering. And I started what was the first adventure travel company in Mexico with a partner. And we started, exploring every single corner of the country, got heavily involved in whitewater paddling, whitewater kayaking, and eventually took groups to these hardcore places around the country. And eventually we took some groups to Nepal and the south of Chile. So we were exploring everywhere. And I trained because, I wanted to keep up with the group. And as a guide, you kind of want to be the strongest guy out there, or at least that's the ego part, right? Eventually you let go of that. But at that time, I needed to be the stronger guy. I needed to show everybody I was there. And so I beat up my body quite a bit. I was always in this cycle of, I'm going to climb a mountain. I'm going to train super hard no matter what. I went to the mountain. It was a big goal. I almost always got to the summit. eventually came back, and I was exhausted mentally and physically, and hurt and pulled muscles. And I got into the cycle of didn't exercise for a while. And then, that little bug in my head started saying, guilt, you need to get out there again. And that cycle, I repeated that cycle many, many times. And like I say, I was in the MRI room more than I can remember doing exams. And and that's kind of the background.
Presumably you were fit, very fit man. What you did for a living was all this adventurous stuff and activity. So your body in general must have been in good shape.
It wasn't in good shape. I've always kept my body in good shape, or so I thought. And I was, and that the reason I'm saying this is because I thought that at the time that by training hard and beating up my body as much as I possibly could, I would get stronger. Now I think differently. I think it's more of a holistic thing that you have to accomplish in order to feel good. And it's, in order to be strong, you have to be strong mentally, and you have to be calm. And eventually you get the strong muscles and you get the mobility. But I wasn't at that place at the time.
So you started to get, I guess your body started to fail in certain areas, did it? Your knees?
Yeah. The story of my life is I was involved heavily in adventure guiding and mountaineering and whitewater paddling mostly. But I also started my company, which was very linked to what I was doing. So I started taking groups and having them sleep in tents, and eventually I bought a small lot and I built a lodge, and then I bought another site and started a small hotel company, which eventually has grown. And I can say now I'm a hotelier. I'm involved in a hospitality business, which has always been linked to adventure. But why I'm saying this is that I'm not a professional athlete, nor a professional coach. Although I've done many retreats and coached people, I'm an entrepreneur, and I have a full life there. So it's hard to keep up with everything when you have all these things happening around as a man. What happened was that when I was water skiing with my boys, my sons, and I landed incorrectly and overextended a knee and destroyed my meniscus muscle, my meniscus, when I was 49. And I called the doctor and had the MRI, and he said, well, you broke your meniscus, you shattered your meniscus. At your age, it's really hard to fix a meniscus so you can get back to what you were doing before. And that hit me really hard, because it was like a little bit of a personal debate in the sense that I've always labeled myself as a strong man that was leading groups and was always training for something, for a race or whatever. And then I said, well, who am I going to be, right? Who am I going to be if I'm not the Waldemar I've been for 40 years? And I can't do these things. So it was I kind of got a little depressed and said, how am I going to go around this? And I had to have 2 surgeries because one didn't work. I did the rehab for a year, and that year I remember I couldn't run for 10 steps. And that definitely got into my head. I had a second surgery, and I did the rehab. I really committed to the rehab. And I remember I have a good friend who lives in California, and he, I told him I was a bit scared of the second surgery. And he said, Waldemar, you're going to come out of this stronger than you were before. And that really stuck into my head. And so after the surgery, now I started studying ways on how I could get stronger, but kind of from the inside, instead of just what I call, sometimes we feel that getting fit comes, I guess I describe it as from the outside in. And that's what I mean is you go to the gym, you train hard or you run or whatever, and you feel that you're going to get strong. And I think it has to come from within. The strength has to come from within. And when you change things inside you, then you start evolving to have a stronger body and stronger mind.
So did you think that if you took this approach, inside out, did you think that would help you get back to the Waldemar that you were aspiring to be still? The adventurer or did you think actually it's almost like a Waldemar Mark II, a different version?
I wanted to become a different version. I was a little bit tired. I wanted to discover a new strength, like a new strength. So what I did is that when I was younger, I used to train. I was into martial arts a bit, and when I was free diving, I was very involved in active meditation, which I didn't call meditation at the time. At the time I said I don't want to mess with meditation. I don't understand it, and it's not for me. And eventually, I discovered that what I did when I was breathing in order to free dive, I was meditating. So I kind of broke some barriers that I had in me that said, I am going to discover an inner path. And I started studying, like I say, martial arts movements. I went into mobility retreats that were focused on how to understand the body and evolve its functionality so you can really stay active for a long time. And I started getting heavily into eating better or understanding what makes me feel better regarding food. And I started putting everything together, designed a recipe for myself, which started to work, and I said, I want more of this.
When you say it started to work, did you feel different? Did you feel stronger? Did you feel more stronger mentally as well as physically?
I think the biggest change is that I started feeling stronger mentally. And what I say is that I think that exercise and working out, as you get older, as you get, close to your 50s and so on, is more a mental game than a physical game. And what I mean is that we start debating ourselves, saying, it's getting harder. When I train, I generally strain a muscle or, my neck hurts or whatever. And you start saying to yourself, maybe, I don't want to be like the older guy who feels he's a kid, right? Or behaves like a kid. I should be behaving more my age, and I should be enjoying, traveling and good wine and whatever. And maybe I shouldn't be so obsessed about keeping fit, right? And I think that's a game that we play in our head. So in order to keep your energy and keep being healthy, you have to design that's what I understood, is that you have to design and change your habits so that you can eventually be able to perform every day this workout that makes you feel good, right? I even changed my vocabulary in the sense that I said, for me, my workout routine, the word routine is quite negative in my vocabulary. It says you have to do things, right? It's something that it's repeated every day, and it's kind of an obligation. So I changed the word routine to the word ritual, which, a ritual is something that nourishes, that makes you feel better, that generally makes you grow. So my movement sessions in every day are my rituals. I wake up and I do my ritual, and within my ritual is my workout, and that so changed everything.
So people listening to this and listening to you to talk about your experience, you've obviously led a very active life, so you were probably starting from quite a good base. But guys listening to this who might be, around 50, perhaps carrying quite a lot of weight, haven't exercised for a long time, maybe just not in a good place mentally, how do they kind of start to adopt what you're doing?
It's small steps. I think probably the biggest obstacle is finding the time, because sometimes, when you have a full life at 50 and you have family and you have work and you have everything happening, one of the biggest challenges is saying, when do I find the time to focus on myself, on my health, and start exercising? I find out that the answer is simple: is just get up early, wake up a little earlier and have those 45 minutes to yourself, and of quiet time, of focus time. And then you start, how do I say it in English? Really focusing that time to yourself, and not letting anything else disturb that time. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And then you have to start listening to your body. I think one thing that we get into when we start training is we train with a little guilt, right? We say, I'm gaining weight, like you said, I'm overweight. I need to do this, and you kind of hammer it, right? You you get into a running club. You say, in 2 months, I'm going to run a marathon. You train like a madman. Maybe you run the marathon, or maybe you quit before that. But after the marathon, you're so tired that you say, I don't want to do this anymore. This is not sustainable for my life. I really like the word sustainable. I think that if we don't design movement practices that are sustainable, not for a month or 6 months, for the rest of your life, you are eventually going to quit. I think discipline and willpower is not enough. You have to do something that brings you joy every single day, so that you can say, wow, this is something that it makes me feel so good that I could do this forever. Then you've broken the formula.
And I guess this goes back to what you were saying about, you're a man of your age, adapt it so it is sustainable to what is possible, feasible. And so then you can continue to do that, I guess, instead of pretending you're still 25 and then never wanting to do it again because you've burnt yourself out or injured yourself.
I was starting to say that learn to listen to your body. And what I mean by this is that the body has cycles, and sometimes, you're in a really good positive cycle where your body and yourself, you're full of energy, you think you can accomplish things, you get up, you're at it. And then it's time to train hard, to give your body what it wants. But there's some other days where you wake up and you're feeling a little slow, and maybe it's because you have a sore throat, or you had a discussion with your partner, or things at work are getting harder, and you're not feeling the energy. And I think it's okay for those days to chill, to not necessarily go and do your interval training as hard as the coach says, because the energy is not there. And when you do things, I think at this age, because you really have to, you're eventually gonna drop it. And when you drop it, everything goes down the track.
And is this what I know you talk about active longevity. Is this what you're describing now?
Yeah, I really like the term active longevity. So I envision myself at 70 being active, going hiking or going skiing with my kids, which won't be kids anymore. They'll be adult. But, I want to go on a bike ride in Europe, tasting wines with friends. I don't want to be stuck in the stigma of being an older person. And I think for you to achieve active longevity is you have to become active today so you can get there. It's not about, you have to think long term so that you can get there at enjoying the things you like. I'm not obsessed with this idea that has come up of, people living to be 150 years old, right? I think there's this trend of people that say I can live for as long, forever almost. I just want to live to wherever I get in really good shape. And really good shape doesn't mean I'm, physically or super ripped or whatever. That's not what I mean. Good shape is being able to do the things that I love, that keep me happy, right? That keep me enjoying, that keep me in this joy. That's what I think about active longevity.
Let me ask you about nature and, connecting or reconnecting with nature as part of this, this way of living.
I've always been really connected to nature because of my past. I find that when I don't connect with nature, I start getting stressed and anxiety, and I kind of feel like I'm in a box. Sometimes I feel that I see this, if you go to a gym, I see this guy or woman, perfectly dressed in her outfit, and she goes into a treadmill, turns the iPad on, gets the headphones on, and starts jogging, and she's watching the news, or she's watching a Netflix series, and then 30 minutes go by, and then treadmill sounds the alarm, it's over, and she goes away to shower. I think that if you do that jog in nature, it is so much more powerful for you than doing it in a treadmill like I described, because you're there. I think training with mindfulness is very powerful. And I think when you're out in nature, you are mindful, you are there, get your iPhone, your headphones away and just be out there. And I think the benefit you get from training or moving while in nature is so much more powerful for well-being than doing exactly the same movement without being there and in a box. And sometimes you have to go to a gym, and it's fine. But the more you can connect, the better.
And how do you manage that? If people listening to this living in a town or city and, there's not a lot of green space or it's quite a long way to forest or whatever. How do people kind of fit that into their lives then? How do you get exposed to nature, connect to nature in that environment?
That's a good question. I live in Mexico City, which is one of the most populated cities in the world, super dense. I can always find a little park. I do my movement sessions, the Wildflow movement sessions in a terrace, in a small space. But I definitely, I train barefoot as much as I can because that connects you. And I've found that you have to get rid of the people are looking at me doing these weird things, right? Just go out to a park and do your training there. I found that people are really inquisitive. Sometimes we think that we need a huge forest, and we don't. We need a little patch of of grass in any little corner, and you can do your movement there. And I feel that it's funny because at first we have this barrier that I'm not gonna feel ridiculous doing movement barefoot in the city park. But I find that people are really interested in things like that. People approach me sometimes and say, "What are you doing? What is this called?" And that gives you more energy to keep doing what you're doing.
So what are you doing? You mentioned Wildflow. What sort of movements are you doing in that environment?
So I kind of have different segments of movement. Some of them are what I call warrior movement, in which I do a lot of training that is similar to martial arts training or is martial arts training. Some of it comes from older style martial arts, jiu-jitsu and kung fu and tai chi. And then some of it comes from, boxing movements, which, by the way, we mentioned this at the beginning of our talk, is for men, I think it's really powerful to do combat movements. For some reason, it gives us, we feel strong when you feel you're a warrior. So I call them warrior movements. And then I do animal locomotion movements, which are imitating animals. This has kind of become trendy, but it's something that people have done for a long time. Kung Fu is based on imitating animal fighting. But I think that imitating animals lends itself to movements that we don't usually do. It's like when we go in a gym, we generally training very linear movements, like, training biceps, that's super linear, or training squats or pull-ups. But in nature, we don't move that way. When we're playing tennis, it's not linear. It's going everywhere. And that's when we get hurt, right? So I try to, when I do my movement sessions, I try to move in more natural ways. Try to imitate or think about how a branch in a tree moves when the wind is blowing. And I want my body to move in that, imitating that movement. And that creates huge mobility in the joints.
And can you give us an example of, kind of replicating animal movement?
Yeah, I do a lot of like gorilla movements where you have to get low, squat down, and kind of move like a gorilla, which moves with grace. I have like 6 what I call pillars of the Wildflow movement. which are functional power. I try to mix these pillars within my movement session every day. What I call functional power, which is, generating strength that is useful. I feel that sometimes people train to get bigger shoulders, but they're not really useful for movement. They might look good, but they're not useful for movement. Functional power for me is power that you can use to move your body. And that's why the word functional really, comes into meaning. Strength that is functional for you to move your body the way you want to move it, in the speed you want to move it. And then mobility is another important pillar. I think as we age, we lose mobility. I mean, sometimes it's even hard to sit in the floor for a while and have a picnic, right? Everything hurts and you can't even find the way to sit. And that's loss of mobility. That's the only thing that's happening.
And does that come down to your muscles and your tendons and your, so it's thinking about all the different components of your body and working on them. So are you kind of saying, more traditional, go to the gym and run on a treadmill or, do weights, that there's perhaps an alternative way that's certainly if you're perhaps older, that is a better way of keeping your body active for longer?
I think there's so many other movements that enhance mobility and strength. I don't think that running is bad, nor is lifting weights. I think that it is just one of the pieces that you have to put together so that you have an active, mobile, agile body. But it's really basic. Sometimes I think that the world of training has become very confusing. There's so much information that you end up only running and lifting weights because that's easy to understand. But honestly, I think that if you think about what people did or what people, if you think about what a little kid does to have fun, that almost encompasses the whole Wildflow movement. If you see a kid in a park running, they're in the ground, they're playing, they're hanging from the branches in the trees. If you can replicate that, then you're moving in an integral, holistic way. We don't sit in the ground anymore. And sitting in the ground, it opens up or evidences the lack of mobility that we have. But it's super basic, right? I always say that, people in the Asian countries, because of their culture, they can squat. And in India, they can squat and play cards and drink beer, right? Instead of sitting in a couch, they're squatting and playing cards in the street. We can't even, get close to squatting because we totally lost our mobility in the hips.
How quickly can you start to see a difference if you're getting up 40 minutes earlier every day and reclaiming some of your life to do what you want to do, outside of the job and your family commitments and everything else? How long before you can start to feel and see a difference?
I would say if you really commit, you start developing your rituals, your daily small little accomplishments, every day small little accomplishments. I would say in 6 months, you're a different person. And I think it's like peeling an onion. You peel a layer and you find another one and you find another one and you find a deeper one. I think the the more you understand how deep you can go, it gets really exciting because it's not like you're there. You can always be better. You can always be more mobile, or, and I think it's really encouraging.
And so we've talked a lot about the physicality of things, and we talked a bit about connecting with nature. So how do you play the kind of emotional and spiritual elements of the way that you're kind of transitioning, I guess?
That's a good question. The Wildflow Method is about combining your movement sessions so you can get stronger, more mobile, agile, with what I call the rituals, which are kind of becomes spiritual. I get every single day, I get up every single day. I, drink what I call the morning potion, which is, hot water with a little apple vinegar and some turmeric. And I start doing my small, movement ritual, and eventually I get into more harder movement. And then after I do my session, I meditate for 15, 20 minutes. And that becomes very spiritual. It's not about going to the gym and training and then going to the steam room and feeling like you've done your workout. It becomes kind of a way of life, of building this idea of keeping active, getting in touch with your body, understanding when you have energy and when you do not have energy, and acting accordingly. And that becomes something that you become that. That's what I'm trying to say. When you become that, you become really aware, and then you're in a totally different position.
So if somebody listening to this wants to find out more about your Wildflow, program, where do they find that information?
I have a website, which is the wildflowmethod.com. I think that a great resource is reading the book, Find Your Wildflow, which is you can get on Amazon and in the website, the e-version. I think the book describes the methodology really well and how it came to be. I didn't design this as a business model. Like I said, I'm not a professional at this. I'm a entrepreneur, active guy who wants to keep on living like he's living for a long time. And I kind of came up with this method for myself. I designed it for myself. And eventually a friend of mine said, you look good. You have a lot of energy. You're strong. What are you doing? And I started sharing my ideas. And he said, you should share this. You should write this and share this for more people to benefit. And that's what I did. And that's how the Wildflow Method came to be. So all of that is in the book. And I also have a deep immersion program, which people can buy and get into it's 80 videos of absolutely everything I know. Every single movement, every single ritual, everything is there. So yeah, that's the resources.
So if I ask you a last question, then I know we've talked about this already, but people listening to this at home thinking, I really want to do something. I've tried and failed, and I'm now, I'm 54. How I almost feel like it's a last chance saloon to get my health back, get my life on track where I want to be. I don't want to be this tired, overweight, guy. What's the first thing that they can do to kind of actively move forward?
I think the first thing is believe that it's possible. Believe that you're not destined to, to be the way you are now. That there's definitely a commitment, but it's not an uphill battle. It's a path of joy. And that's what I would say. Sometimes we feel that we get into these super demanding programs, like, in 30 whatever days, you're going to have a ripped stomach, a six pack in your, and of course, those 30 whatever days are gruesome, right? It's so hard that when you're done, you say, I don't want to live like this. I think it's not about that. That's the wrong way to approach it. There is a path of joy and of feeling good to getting in shape and getting strong. And that's what I designed in the Wildflow. So if, the Wildflow is a path, I think there's many paths, but what I want to say, it's not a horrible uphill battle. It's a beautiful one.
That's a great message. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Waldemar, then visit his website, wildflowmethod.com. And you can also buy his book, Find Your Wildflow, on Amazon, and we'll provide a link in the show notes. To help raise the profile of the podcast, it really helps if you could leave a rating or review, and please do promote it to your networks so that we can expand the reach of these stories. Finally, there's also a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on the podcast and available on Amazon and through other online retailers.